Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
What are people hearing and reading as they decide when and how to vote? Clearly, the biggest story of 2020, despite President Trump's deep denialism, is coronavirus. It's a once-in-a-century pandemic. It's affected every person on the planet. Trump is tired of COVID-19, but most Americans are still wide awake, paying attention. He doesn't want to hear about it on TV anymore. He is lashing out at the press for keeping COVID in the news, but the public is paying attention to the news. Most of you want to know more, want to stay updated on how to stay safe. A recent Pew survey found that 4 out of 5 Americans are following news about the virus closely. So when Trump attacked CNN the other day for focusing on COVID, when he called us dumb bastards, that word dumb ricocheted right back at him. Obviously, no one wants COVID to be a top story, but the overwhelming majority of Americans know that it is, that it has to be a top priority. This is less about newsrooms setting the agenda and more about the virus and the public health community setting the agenda. This is less about media fear-mongering and more about public health experts leading the way. This virus has a nasty way of asserting itself, and it's happened again this weekend. News of this new outbreak in Vice President Mike Pence's inner circle. It's just the latest example. 5 people in his orbit have tested positive. Thankfully, we've heard from a White House official today that Pence and his wife both tested negative this morning, so that's good news. We have also heard from White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who told Jake Tapper this morning, quote, "We are not going to get control of the pandemic." That is the sound of capitulation by the federal government. That is the sound of surrender. Trump, meanwhile, sounds bored with this leadership challenge. He actually is starting to sound like his impersonator, Alec Baldwin. Watch.
Coronavirus, so boring, right?
That's all I hear. Turn on television. COVID, 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 COVID. A plane goes down. 500 people dead. They don't talk about it.
We don't talk about that because it hasn't happened in many years, but he's whipping up hatred of the media anyway. It's part of his closing argument of the campaign. And he's adding a conspiracy theory. This is what it is, a conspiracy theory to top it all off.
COVID, 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 COVID. By the way, on November 4th, you won't hear about it anymore. So.
You hear the crowd, you hear their reactions. Presumably Trump doesn't mean this literally. Hopefully he knows better, but obviously COVID will remain a top story all winter long. It is forecastable, the same way we can forecast that winter storms will be a top story. And in the same way that snow piles up whether you measure it or not, the virus spreads whether or not you test for it. But Trump continues to blame the media for caring so much about testing.
What it does is it gives the fake news media something to talk about. So they say cases are up in the United States. That's because we test.
Clearly, he doesn't want the top story to be about sick and dying Americans struggling with a virus that's out of control, in part due to his government's failures. Obviously, he wants us talking about Hunter Biden or fake news or how mean 60 Minutes is to him. And his base agrees, but he is out of touch with where the rest of the country is. I think this is really important to recognize. 78% of Americans in a brand new poll today say they remain concerned about getting infected Or to put it another way, just 1 in 5 Americans are not concerned about getting infected with COVID-19. Now, Trump claims this is because the media is trying to scare everybody, but most Americans are looking at the raw data, listening to local officials, and making up their own minds. And more than 6 in 10 of them disapprove of how Trump has handled this. He wants this to seem like a fight about the media. Maybe he thinks that's a fight he can win, right? He's been doing that for years and years. Maybe he thinks he can win against the media since he's losing against the virus. But he's not really fighting the media on this one. He's resisting reality. He's trying to make up his own reality, which is really the central story of the Trump years ever since Inauguration Day. Another day, another distraction. You know, Trump's lies are so pervasive that the Washington Post says he is on track to exceed 25,000 false or misleading claims by Election Day. CNN's Daniel Dale is almost running out of adjectives to describe all the lies. But the polls show that reality is winning. Reality is winning. Taking the threat seriously, talking about it, covering it responsibly is a way to earn trust. That's what the president has never fully accepted all year long. But news outlets have. Well, most of them. I think most news outlets are actually gaining trust by covering this pandemic seriously. But to borrow a phrase from Trump, there are some dumb you-know-whats in the media industry. But they are the ones who have downplayed this disease, who deny the danger to this day. Sadly, they are mostly right-wing pro-Trump websites, TV shows, other megaphones. And these outlets are not just missing the biggest story of the year. They are making it bigger by making the crisis worse. Just a few minutes ago on Fox, Maria Bartiromo interviewed the White House Chief of Staff, just like Tapper did an hour earlier. She didn't ask a single question about the new outbreak in Vice President Pence's orbit. That's malpractice. See, if these interviewers and hosts and propagandists think they are helping Trump, they are actually doing him and all of us a grave disservice. The virus doesn't disappear just because you pretend it's not there. It doesn't disappear just because you don't ask about it or talk about it or hold the administration accountable. But I think what's most important is the polling I showed you. Most Americans get what's going on. Reality is winning.
It is Monday, the 26th of October of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, an appropriate dish for, well, a party. Why? You would think that this morning dish after the weekend, from all the leftovers from the weekend, repurposed into a gourmet delight, is the perfect dish for a party. Well, yeah. A party as illegitimate as everything else that's been going on with this administration. They're going to throw a party for Amy. Outside, weather permitting, Mark Meadows says. Yeah, you know. We'll talk about him in a bit. They announced Amy Coney Barrett's nomination before Ruth Bader Ginsburg was even buried. Ignoring her deathbed wish. Oh, they called it a hoax. They said Ginsburg's family made it up. And now they're going to throw a party for Amy before the votes are even cast. This whole process, this whole nomination, this whole thing has been illegitimate and continues to be so. We know why they're rushing this in. They need all the help they can. They're going to try to pull another one of these 2000 debacles. Don't forget, Amy was a Brooks Brother rioter, too. She wasn't wearing the suit, but she was there. Kavanaugh, Brooks Brother rioter. They're all being rewarded, aren't they? So, this guy with the really weird, what's going on with the makeup now? It's gotten really darker. Have they, because of the pandemic, they're not getting the right ratios for the orange? Huh? Or is this his fall shade? Maybe it's his fall shade, which is appropriate because I got to tell you, next week, yeah, the guy's taking a fall. Except he won't really be taking a fall until Inauguration Day when he doesn't show up. And then we have to live with it until then. Oh, boy, you think it's bad now? Just imagine. Just imagine. Anyway, Peggy Noonan. What's up with Peggy Noonan? I'll tell you what's up with Peggy Noonan. Peggy Noonan just lets the gin and tonic do the talking, okay? Anybody who thinks that Rush Limbaugh can stop traffic because of his supposed good looks has probably a bleary eye of the world. Bleary eye, yeah. I mean, have you seen Rush at any point in his career? I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about at any point. Jeez. Now, I don't look at guys necessarily in that way. But, I can appreciate form. And Rush? Okay, well, I just wonder whom or what finds that attractive. Says more about, I don't know what. The world, I guess the world we live in. Oh, yeah. Blame it on the world. Okay, well, my snoozing sous chef is snoozing away, can you tell? It's been a hard weekend for him. We went out and played with a ball and got him a new bone, played with that, and play, and then he's got he's pretty tuckered out from all the playing. Anybody see the World Series? I have had a hard time getting into sports during the pandemic. It just seems different. But, it is the World Series. It's interesting. Sort of reminds me of the original Star Trek episodes where they would come back, or they wouldn't come back, but they'd go to a planet that seemed to surprisingly mirror Earth in many aspects. One was like Roman gladiators, except it was in, modern times, and, our times at the time, but, just pretend as for now. And it was like Roman gladiators in literal cage matches that we see now. When I first saw the cage match dynamic arise, it took me to that Star Trek episode. Oh, yeah, I saw that before. I thought it was weird. Now they're doing it like it's supposed to be normal. Still seems weird. And it seems like we are in another one of those, aren't we? Another one of those scenes from Star Trek, because even though with they had 11,000 spectators actually in the stadium, but when you have a stadium that holds, considerably more than that, it doesn't seem like very much. And just the whole sports dynamic seems very much like canned on a sound stage. But on the other hand, competition is competition, and I've been part of some pretty robust competitions during what was supposed to be practice. It was just practice. Well, there's a lot of competition there, and within the construct of an actual game, it elevates. So it's been a little bit interesting. When I would frequent France, back in the day, and back in the day was in the 90s, when I would frequent France, frequently, I would miss the baseball season, and the French just aren't into baseball. You got American football, soccer, of course, lots of track, the alpine sports, Nordic sports too. Yeah, indeed. But American baseball just not really into it. And back then, it was a bit hard to pick up some games. You could pick up Turner. You could pick up the Braves on through CNN and Turner Broadcasting because they had a worldwide reach. But basically, the only way I could keep up with sports was to get the International Herald and read the box scores, and they'd have them, the New York edition. And sometimes on CNN, I could find box scores then. So I pretty much gave up on the baseball season when I was frequenting France frequently. And it feels a bit like that, except without the really good cheese, wine. Oh, the light. The light in France No wonder they have so many great artists there. I have to tell you, it's true. The light is very different there, and it's lovely. And just the whole ecosystem, the landscape. You just don't have that during a pandemic, and the reason for it is because we're locked in. I'm not venturing out there. Are you kidding me? With the spikes, and we're way past the Sturgis infection rates now. All right, we got the resonance from people who got sick and passed it on from Sturgis. Now we're getting sick from those people, and they've been wherever they've been too. Scary. Oh, we did have a bit of a scare in our family with it, with my sister being on the front lines in respiratory. She's an RN in respiratory therapy. So you can imagine. But fortunately, no. Everything's still turning up negative, and that's good. That's good because you know what the number one is infection spreader right now are small family gatherings. So I guess we got to give up Thanksgiving. I know we have pretty much. Usually we have like 30, 40 people. That's that to me is like a small party of family. Well, it's only going to be Mom and me, so I may have mentioned that I got a duck, not a goose. I'm going to do a duck for Ma. And I guess we won't be visiting with my sister except from afar. She can be on the other side of the fence line. We'll be up on the porch. Hi. So that's where we are, folks. Yep. The administration, as we'll get deeper into our news read today, have given up on the pandemic. Yep. Waving the white flag because they think the white flag means something not like surrender, but hey, we're white. We can do anything we want. Okay? Well, speaking of which, what is on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, starting off in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? At the top, that was Stelter explaining that Trump is not fighting the media. He's at war with reality, and reality is winning. Thank God. Do we thank God? I don't know. Thank reality, maybe. Oh, yes, on the rest of the menu, even without a spike of infections in his office, health experts question whether Pence campaigning is really essential work. These people are so corrupt. You don't need me to tell you that, but I'm telling you anyway. The Texas Supreme Court temporarily reinstated Abbott's order for only one voter drop box per county. Boy, that's a seesaw battle now, isn't it? And despite Republican claims that Democrats will pack the courts, the GOP has been packing state courts for nearly 2 decades. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a group of hackers have rocked Finland by demanding ransom for thousands of intimate patient records hacked from a private psychotherapy center. And tens of thousands of protesters disrupted church services across Poland on Sunday yesterday over a near-total ban on abortion. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. To the leftish of our chat room link, that is really near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page, and that is there because, well, you know what? we have to pay our bills. We do. And we also have to continue and complete the purchases of the workhorse machinery that needs to replace the workhorse machinery that has been working like workhorses for oh so many years. And also the attendant software that one must get with it as well. And so thank you to those of you who have been so generous over these many years. You know what those people have done? They've basically sent us the equivalent of an espresso-type coffee drink. The cost of that has come our way, and we have stretched those dollars, paid our bills, flown under the radar so we can continue to resist as the founders originally intended. They did. They originally intended this. So thank you for your generosity to those of you who have been so generous. And I'm just going to put out there a thank you to those of you who are considering possibly in the future, because I know times are perilous and tough right now. In fact, we have an election coming up. We are in an election right now. But thank you for your generosity in the future when you're able. Okay, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it is simple. Just go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that, and a lot more, too. So much more. Thank you, Tom. I take care of @Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on my Twitter handle. And you can also follow the show on Twitter @CookbookWest and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. And, I got to get on Amazon. I do. Okay, hopefully we'll get on there real quick. And wherever you can find podcasts, that's where we will be. All right, we better dive into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It comes out of the Associated Press by Marilyn Marchioni. Health policy specialist questioned White House officials' claim that federal rules on essential workers allow Vice President Mike Pence to continue to campaign and not quarantine himself after being exposed to the coronavirus. Campaigning is not an official duty that might fall under the guidelines meant to ensure that police, first responders, and key transportation and food workers can still perform jobs that cannot be done remotely, the health expert said, because you can campaign without going and spreading it around, but you know they're doing this on purpose. A Pence aide said yesterday, Sunday, that the vice president would continue to work and travel, including for campaigning, after his chief of staff and some other close contacts, we're up to 5 now, I think there's a 6th in the wings, all tested positive. Pence tested negative yesterday, Sunday, and decided to keep traveling after consulting White House medical personnel because those guys are quacks. They'll tell him anything they want to hear. You can test negative and still pass this thing around. Come on. You got to be careful. Pence's chief of staff, Mark Short, was among those who tested positive. Trump said early Sunday that Short was quarantining. Well, good for him. That usually means isolating oneself for 14 days after exposure in case an infection is developing to prevent spreading the virus to others. Pence was holding a rally yesterday in North Carolina, events in Minnesota and Pennsylvania today, and more events in North Carolina and South Carolina tomorrow, Tuesday. The most recent numbers show COVID-19 cases are rising in 75% of the country. Yesterday, Sunday, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien told reporters that Pence is following all the rules from federal health officials. He called Pence an essential worker and said essential workers going out and campaigning or voting are about as essential as things we can do as Americans. What? Okay. However, the guidelines on essential workers from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are aimed at folks like police, first responders, and key transportation and food workers. The Department of Homeland Security spells out 16 categories of critical infrastructure workers, including those at military bases, nuclear power plants, courthouses, and public works facilities like dams and water plants. I don't see campaigning on the list, said Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice at Johns Hopkins and a former Maryland State Health Department chief. Anything that does not have to be done in person and anything not related to his job as vice president would not be considered essential. Quite maddening what's going on in Texas. This next offering comes to us out of Reuters by anonymous worker bees working there anonymously, at least in terms of the byline on this offering. Here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. The Texas Supreme Court on Saturday temporarily reinstated the governor's ban on multiple drop-off sites for mail ballots in a short-term victory for Donald Trump. The ban will remain in effect while the state Supreme Court fully reviews a Friday appeals court ruling that overturned the order by Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican like the president, who faces Democrat Joe Biden in a race for the White House on November 3rd. That would be the president, and we never use the P word here. It says it right in the Netroots Radio style manual. The P word shall not be applied to this guy, Donnie Two Scoops. It won't. But, it applies to Trump, not to Abbott, obviously. The Texas Third Court of Appeals had unanimously agreed with a lower court that limiting the number of drop boxes would lengthen lines, increase the risk that voters could get infected with COVID-19, and infringe on their right to vote. Trump has repeatedly criticized mail-in ballots, claiming without evidence they would lead to widespread fraud because when people vote, they don't vote for Republicans, and they hate this guy. Abbott issued his order limiting mail-in ballot drop boxes to one per county on October 1st, saying it was aimed at preventing fraud. The move, which closed more than a dozen satellite locations in at least 2 counties, drew condemnation from Democrats and voting rights advocates because, let's look at Harris County. 4 million voters? One drop box? Come on. Texas, which Trump won by 9 percentage points in 2016, has not voted for a Democratic presidential candidate in more than 4 decades because that's how well and efficient the Republicans have been at gerrymandering. Opinion polls have suggested it might be in reach for Biden, in part because of dissatisfaction over Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. You would think locking up kids in icebox baby gulags would have been enough. But when grandma's dying, and so is your 9-year-old, that's not a way to engender goodwill. DeMilo of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Republican claims that Democrats would expand the U.S. Supreme Court to undercut the conservative majority if they win the presidency and control of Congress has a familiar ring. Well, it's a tactic the GOP already has employed in recent years with state Supreme Courts when they have controlled all levers of state political power. Republican governors in Arizona and Georgia have signed bills passed by GOP-dominated legislators to expand the number of seats on their state's respective high courts. In Iowa, the Republican governor gained greater leverage over the commission that names judicial nominees. The arguments being advanced now by Republican leaders that this is an affront to separation of powers, that this is a way of delegitimizing courts, those don't seem to be holding at the state level, said Marin Levy, a law professor at Duke University who has written about efforts to expand state high courts. Trump and the GOP have seized on the issue in the final weeks of the presidential race, arguing that Democratic nominee Joe Biden would push a Democratic Congress to increase the number of seats on the Supreme Court and fill those with liberal justices. Oh, horrors! Some on the left have floated the idea in the wake of Republicans' rush to confirm Amy Coney Barrett to fill the seat of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, if you didn't know, was a liberal icon who died last month. Biden, for his part, has said he's not a fan of so-called court packing and is far from certain that Democrats can win back the majority in the U.S. Senate. Well, thank you for the come down, Mr. DeMilo. Arizona's governor, Republican Doug Ducey, said he opposes adding seats to the U.S. Supreme Court. We shouldn't be changing our institutions, he told reporters recently. Yet, Ducey signed a bill that did just that at the state level in 2016, expanding the Arizona Supreme Court from 5 seats to 7. As a result, Ducey has appointed more judges than any other governor in the state's history because he wanted to be on the gravy train like Trump was too. Ducey said the situations are not the same. Yeah, because he's a Republican. Joe Biden is not. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, A Dark Journey. The Devil All the Time, out now on Netflix, is the screen adaptation of the 2015 novel of the same name by Donald Ray Pollock. Both could be described as Southern, Midwestern, or maybe even Appalachian Gothic. Religion and its imagery pervade, interwoven with mental illness, violence, and depravity. It's deftly narrated throughout by the author, who was in fact born in one of the two towns where much of the action occurs, the actually real town of Knockemstiff, Ohio. There's a bit of Coen Brothers vibe here, minus the humor. We meet a character, or one of his or her relatives, or maybe a character whose storyline started in the same place, then the characters who enter their stories, and so on. Despite the narration, it is a bit confusing, though it becomes less so as the storylines converge. What stands out in this one are stellar performances across the board, meticulous 1950s set design, and dark, foreboding cinematography that seems to portend every horror. Tom Holland shows his chops in a non-Marvel role as the adult version of Arvin, the closest thing the film has to a protagonist. We get to see Bill Skarsgård without the clown suit as Willard, and in what may be the most intense portrayal, we have Robert Pattinson as the perverse preacher, the Reverend Teagarden. From the grisly opening scene, recapitulated in a scene about midway through, to a comment from Arvin at the end about the possibility of going to Vietnam, there's a literary symmetry to the proceedings. The Devil All the Time, like others of its ilk, can leave you questioning the point of it all, past lurid discovery, but exploration of our dark sides seems never to be invalid at the cinema. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Annie Sneed. What you're hearing is war among woodpeckers, a species called acorn woodpeckers. The birds fight long, bloody battles over access to trees, where these woodpeckers nest and store their food. You guessed it, acorns.
They build these giant acorn granaries, and these are basically acorn storage structures where they store thousands of acorns every fall.
Sahas Barve with the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History.
In bark and in dead parts of trees, they make individual holes in which they store one acorn at a time, and some granaries may have tens of thousands of holes.
When woodpeckers that hold high-quality territory die, others come to claim it for themselves. That's when the fighting begins.
It's a lot of energy that they put in, and that sort of tells you how valuable big granaries are for them. So they put in a lot of effort in the short term for this big long-term prize.
Berve and his colleagues tracked acorn woodpeckers during these power struggles. The researchers observed up to 12 groups of birds sparring for a single territory, typically with 3 or 4 birds per clan. Individual birds may fight more than 10 hours a day for several days.
We didn't know that bird conflicts could last that long. It's really, really amazing. You can imagine the oak savanna of California. There's a big oak tree, and you can just hear birds calling because they give very distinct these waka waka calls when they're fighting each other. You can hear it from far away because there are so many birds calling. And when you go closer, you will see birds flying around pretty chaotically. There are birds posturing. So most coalitions will group together every now and then and spread out their wings on a very prominent branch of the tree and show basically who they are and that they are together. But these conflicts are often very violent. So you will see birds with big injuries. So you'll see bloodied feathers. You can see eyes gouged out, birds with some injuries that are obviously fatal. We've seen birds with broken wings. And also birds fall to the ground, like fighting each other. Like I often say, these birds have spears for mouths, so they can do a lot of damage to each other.
Other woodpeckers flew in from up to 3 kilometers away just to watch the fighting and to glean social information. The study is in the journal Current Biology. The scientists say these battles reveal a lot about animal social behavior.
We often think of birds as not very intelligent animals, but we are discovering very quickly that we are not the only busybody, nosy, super curious social animal out there. And birds are doing that all the time. Social complexity is something that's evolved multiple times in the animal kingdom, and we are just one of them.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Annie Sneed.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Heart disease and stroke can be catastrophic. They're leading causes of death, disability, and healthcare spending in the U.S., yet they're largely preventable. Alarmingly, heart disease and stroke are taking a toll on middle-aged adults 35 to 64, with over 800,000 deaths and hospitalizations in 2016. Million Hearts is a national initiative focused on preventing 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular events by 2022. Coordinated actions by Million Hearts partners in communities, healthcare, and public health will keep people healthy, optimize care, and improve outcomes in populations at risk. Everyone has a part to play. Focus on the ABCs of heart health. A. Aspirin use when appropriate. B. Blood pressure control. C. Cholesterol management. And S. Smoking cessation. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Let's remember those migrant kids locked up in cages at the border. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Under the Trump administration policy, immigrants who crossed the border without authorization were locked up and separated from their children who had made the perilous journey with them. Many of the detained parents were shipped to federal detention facilities, sometimes thousands of miles away, while their kids were kept locked up in those cages near the border. Now it turns out some 545 of those children may never see their parents again for predictable reasons. For example, 60 of the children were younger than 5 when they were separated from their parents, so they can't really help in the search for their parents. Good record-keeping by the government was essential, but the government's record-keeping was abysmal. The legal director of Justice in Motion, the group leading the search for the family, said, quote, "The Trump administration had no plans to keep track of the families or ever reunite them. That's why we're in the situation we're in now." And the lead attorney for the ACLU in the court challenge against the policy, now seeking family reunification, said, "The fact that the government kept the names from the court, from us, from the public, was astounding. We could have been searching for them this whole time." But that didn't happen, so the searching and the lawsuit go on. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1837. That was the day that Louisa Lee Schuyler was born in New York City. She was dedicated to the causes of public health and welfare, especially for the poor. This led her to help found the Bellevue Training School for Nurses in 1873. It was the first nurses' school in the United States based on the principles of Florence Nightingale, the English social reformer who established modern nursing practices. Louisa had become concerned with the conditions found at the city's public hospitals. Along with 3 other women, she toured Bellevue Hospital, finding poor lighting, dire sanitary conditions, and even a laundry that had run out of soap. The women wrote up a report about their findings. They made the case that a professionally trained nursing staff would help remedy the situation. The work of women during the Civil War had shown the potentially important role of nurses in providing medical care. The women's request was approved on a trial basis at Bellevue. Bellevue Hospital had opened its doors in 1736, making it the oldest continually running public hospital in the United States. The first class of nurses included just 6 women. Early training focused on improving sanitary conditions at the hospital and seeing to patient comfort. But instruction grew quickly to include basic medical training. By 1879, enrollment had grown to more than 60 trainees. Proud of their accomplishments, graduates wore a school pin. Designed by Tiffany & Company, the pin portrayed a crane in the middle of a wreath of poppies. The school operated for nearly a century, until the training program was incorporated into Hunter College. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
The final week leading up to the 2020 presidential election has begun with, for so many Americans, a sense of despair coupled with a bit of hope on the horizon. The despair comes with the Senate set to vote to confirm Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court Monday evening. After voting Thursday morning to move Barrett out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Senate held a special session over the weekend to accommodate the 30 hours of necessary debate. On Sunday, they voted 51-48 to end debate on Barrett's nomination, with Senators Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, the only two to break ranks with the Republicans and vote with the Democrats. Murkowski said over the weekend that although she's voting no on the procedural matters, she will vote yes to confirm Barrett in the final vote. Monday's vote is expected to be held at around 7 p.m. It'll take place roughly a month after Trump announced Barrett's nomination to replace the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. During Trump's presidency, the Republican Senate has confirmed 219 judicial nominees across the circuit, and with Barrett's confirmation, that'll include 3 to the Supreme Court. Among the burning questions looming Monday morning are, will Vice President Mike Pence come to the Capitol to preside over the vote? 2 things. 1, presiding over the Senate is a novelty, not a necessity. And 2, he shouldn't because there's a COVID outbreak among his staff. Yep. Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, has tested positive, and reports say that as many as 5 Pence staffers have also tested positive, but his office hasn't released any more information. In fact, they tried to keep the entire outbreak secret. So much for transparency. By the way, the Senate is scheduled to go home until after the election, after it votes on the nomination. So much for any COVID relief bill being passed before Election Day. Oh, but before they leave, they've got a party, right? The White House is working on hosting an outdoor event for a ceremonial swearing in of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court that could come late Monday night after her expected confirmation vote. Can you say another super spreader event? Unbelievable. Well, Election Day is 1 week from Tuesday, 8 days out, and more people have already cast ballots in this year's presidential election than voted earlier absentee in the 2016 race entirely. As of Monday morning, we're closing in on 60 million ballots cast so far, passing the 58 million that the Associated Press logged as being cast through the mail or at in-person voting sites in 2016. But there's another big number floating around out there. The United States just hit its highest 7-day average since the pandemic began. More than 225,000 Americans have already died from the virus, and it's in that context that White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows on CNN's State of the Union told Jake Tapper,
we're not going to control the pandemic. We are going to control the fact that we get vaccines, therapeutics, and other mitigation.
Why aren't we going to get control of the pandemic?
Because it is a contagious virus, just like the flu.
Yeah, but why not make efforts to contain it?
Well, we are making efforts to contain it.
By running all over the country, not wearing a mask?
Jake,
that's what the vice president's doing.
So they've completely given up. But they've already announced that Mike Pence plans to continue traveling as scheduled despite an outbreak among at least 3 members of his staff, including Mark Short. And while all this is happening, Trump declared on Sunday that the coronavirus crisis is, quote, ending. Again, let me stress, that's even though the single-day infection levels have just hit their highest point since the pandemic began. Yet, he's still lying to his rally attendees. On Sunday in New Hampshire, he said that a potential coronavirus vaccine is, quote, going to be delivered fast. That will quickly end the pandemic. It's ending anyway, he said. We're rounding the turn, but the vaccine will get it down fast because we want normal life to resume. Oh, please. And just what will happen if Trump wins a second term? Axios reported on Sunday that he plans to fire FBI Director Christopher Wray. He's also expected to quickly replace CIA Director Gina Haspel and Defense Secretary Mark Esper, among others. And the president has also privately complained about his Roy Cohn, Attorney General William Barr, though reportedly he has no formal plans to remove him. And finally, the State Department said Sunday that it has halted employee diversity and inclusion training programs. Reuters reporting that an internal State Department cable indicated that the programs had been paused after Trump last month issued an executive order ending the programs, which the White House has called divisive. That includes any teaching by any federal agencies that the United States is, quote, fundamentally racist or sexist. Opposite world indeed. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, weather from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, I guess. You know what? I guess we've made it to fall. Indeed. And looks like we will be a tad warmer than yesterday. We should be in the mid-60s, and we were close to the mid-60s yesterday. Sunny conditions throughout the way, winds light and variable, clear skies overnight with lows around 35, and mainly sunny tomorrow with a high in the mid-70s, though the nights are going to be rather chilly in the low to mid-30s. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County here in the southern part of Oregon now stand at 1,617. We will have the updated totals later today. That is only part of the weekend totals. And we have another spike. We're through another spike. Is it the same spike that we had before? Or is it another, a second, a third? I think it's a continuation of the first, but who's gonna split hairs on that? Who cares? Confirmed deceased remain at 6, though that is, of course, a gross undercount. Pollen is rated at none in the region, outside the window of the mothership here, though the region air quality index is good at 27 parts per million, though. And the daytime UV index is moderate at 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.41 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 51%. Oh, it's getting dry. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased and these people planted. These purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. London is 56 and partly cloudy. Paris is 57 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 67 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 56 and fair. Kabul is 57 and fair. Hong Kong is 72 and fair. Tokyo is 60 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 57 with showers in the vicinity. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and clear. And New York is 54 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased, and these people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Sherry Tanner of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Finland's interior minister summoned key cabinet members into an emergency meeting yesterday, Sunday, after hundreds and possibly tens of thousands of patient records at a private Finnish psychotherapy center were accessed by hackers now demanding ransoms. Finnish Interior Minister Maria Ohisalo tweeted that authorities would, quote, provide speedy crisis help to victims, end quote, of the security breach at the Vastamo Psychotherapy Center, an incident she called shocking and very serious. But Vastamo, which has branches throughout the Nordic country of 5.5 million and operates as a subcontractor for Finland's public health system, said its client register with intimate patient information was likely stolen during 2 attacks that started almost 2 years ago. The first incursions probably took place in November of 2018, and it is likely that our data systems were penetrated also between the end of November 2018 and March 2019, the center said in a statement late on Saturday. The center said the unknown perpetrator or perpetrators had published at least 300 patient records containing names and contact information using the anonymous Tor communication software. The blackmailer has started to approach victims of the security breach directly with extortion letters, the center said. The National Bureau of Investigation said yesterday, Sunday, up to tens of thousands of Vastamo clients may have had their personal data compromised. Police were looking for the possible culprits both in Finland and abroad.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Alicia Ptak and Kuba Strzeski of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tens of thousands of activists disrupted church services across Poland yesterday, Sunday, chanting during Mass and spraying slogans on walls to protect against a court ruling that amounts to a near-total ban on abortion. In the first large-scale demonstrations directly targeting churches in the predominantly Catholic country, crowds carried posters depicting a crucified pregnant woman and handed out protest cards to priests. A constitutional court decision outlawing abortions due to fetal defects has now triggered 4 days of demonstrations. The ruling ended the most common of the few legal grounds left for abortion in Poland and set the country further apart from the European mainstream. In the southern city of Katowice, a 7,000-strong crowd of mostly women gathered in front of the cathedral, chanting "This is war" and "Human law, not church law." State news agency PAP said police used tear gas after officers were attacked. 36 protesters interrupted a mass in the western city of Poznan, chanting "We are sick of this," and holding banners with slogans including "Catholic women also need the right to abortion" in front of the altar. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.